Jace Coulter had never known a woman's hand in kindness until the Apache girl rode up beneath the blistering sun. The blood smeared on his skin wasn't his own, though he almost wished it were. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. He stood beside his staggering mare, watching buzzards drift in dark circles against the pitiless Arizona sky. 3 days with no water. 2 days with nothing to eat. 1 day away from giving up. The worn leather reins slipped through his calloused grip as his horse, Duchess, let out a weary whinny, her proud head sagging toward the sand. Even she knew their time was nearly over in this god-forsaken stretch between Tucson and nowhere. Jace tugged his hat lower, shading a face carved by sun and hardship. 30 years old, he had survived the war, endured Montana winters, trapping beaver, and walked out of gunfights other men hadn't lived to tell. But this desert might be the end of him. The silence stretched for miles, broken only by the hiss of wind and the cry of a hawk. Then came hoofbeats, sharp cutting through the stillness. Jace's hand dropped to the Colt on his hip by instinct. A lifetime of survival taught him hesitation was death. But when the rider crested the ridge, his hand stilled, not from fear, but something stranger. She rode bareback on a paint horse, hair streaming like a black banner, skin glowing like burnished copper, her posture fluid, fearless. Apache, no doubt. Heading straight for him. Every bone in his body urged him to draw steel. Apache raids had bled the territory for months. Yet something in her presence stayed his hand. Perhaps it was her seat in the saddle firm, but not threatening, or the fact that she rode alone when no raider ever did. Or maybe he was simply too bone-tired to care. She halted 20 yards off just outside pistol range. Smart. Her dark eyes studied him like a hawk sizing prey. She read his ragged clothes, the trembling of his gun hand, his half-dead horse. For long moments they faced each other through the shimmering heat. Two strangers in a land that devoured the unprepared. Then she spoke, her English clear, though touched with an accent. "You are lost, white man." It was no question. Jace found his voice, though it rasped like gravel. Not lost, just taking the long road. Her lips hinted at a smile. The long road to the buzzards' bellies. Despite everything, Jace almost grinned. "You got a better idea?" She studied him, then nudged closer. He caught the beadwork on her deerskin, the silver at her wrist, and the unreadable depth in her eyes. "There is water," she said. "Half a day north. A hidden spring my grandmother once showed me." Jace frowned. "Why tell me, because dead men make poor company?" He blinked, sure the heat was making him dream. "Company." She swept her arm toward the endless waste. "I ride for California. The gold fields near Sacramento. They say a person's worth is in their labor, not their blood." The thought made him laugh, though it sounded more like a cough. "An Apache girl bound for California alone." "Not Apache," she corrected her tone, sharp. "Chiricahua. And not alone if you've sense enough to accept help." Jace looked at Duchess, barely standing, then back at the woman who appeared like a desert vision. Everything in him said it was madness. Enemy. Yet logic meant nothing with death breathing down his neck. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tala," she answered like a dare. "Jace. Jace Coulter." "Well, Jace. Coulter, do you want to see the sunrise? Or shall I leave you to the buzzards?" He glanced skyward at the circling shadows, then back at this fierce apparition. In 30 hard years, he'd never seen anything like her. "Reckon I'll take the sunrise," he muttered. Tala gave one firm nod. Then we ride north. But hear me, white man. I am not your guide, not your servant, and surely not your woman. We travel together only because it serves us both. The weight on those last words hinted at more, but Jace was in no shape to argue. He climbed into Duchess's saddle, the mare swaying beneath him. They set off in silence, Tala's pace steady yet merciful. She moved with the certainty of one who knew the land, while Jace focused on staying upright. Slowly, the flat desert yielded to rolling hills scattered with scrub oak and manzanita. The air cooled a touch, though the sun still bore down. They paused in the shadow of a boulder. Tala's voice broke the quiet. "You've been long in Arizona 3 years," Jace rasped. "Since the war ended." "Which side Union?" "3rd Cavalry." She nodded, as if that explained everything. Tala gave a short nod, as if that explained everything. "You carry yourself like a soldier. Even half dead from thirst, you sit a horse like a man trained to obey and endure." Jace Coulter couldn't tell if it was meant as praise or just an observation. He held his tongue, watching her silhouette against the fading horizon. She couldn't have seen more than 20 summers yet. Her bearing carried the weight of someone who had lived far beyond her years. "And what about you?" he asked. "How does a Chiricahua woman come to speak English clearer than half the drifters in Tucson?" Her jaw tightened. "My father was white. A traitor who wandered into our winter camp when I was 12. He stayed long enough to teach me his tongue and leave my mother with child. Then he vanished with the spring thaw." The way she spoke, flat, unshaken, cut deeper than any outburst could. Jace felt the urge to ease the shadow in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "Don't pity me, Jace Coulter. I carry no shame in who I am. I learned early that a woman of mixed blood belongs to neither world, so I carve my own path." They mounted again, riding north, as the sun dropped toward the western ridges. True to her word, Tala led them to a narrow canyon where a spring whispered between stone walls. The water was cold and sweet, and Jace drank as if tasting life itself for the first time. While the horses plunged their muzzles into the pool, the two of them filled their canteens. As he swallowed deep gulps, the world sharpened the colors richer, the sounds clearer. He would live another day. "We should stay here tonight," Tala said, as the canyon darkened. "Better to move at dawn." Jace nodded, grateful beyond words. They scraped together a fire from deadwood and shared scraps of jerky and hardtack. After 3 starving days, it might as well have been a banquet. In the firelight, Tala's face shifted. Hard edges softened her copper skin, glowing like something almost unearthly. Jace felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with hunger. He had known women before Saloon Girls camp followers, even Dora Mae Sutton in Denver, who had warmed his bed one long winter. But those were fleeting bargains of flesh. This was different. Sitting across from the woman who had saved his life, he felt something stir that was dangerous in ways bullets could never be. To distract himself, he asked, "Why California freedom?" She answered simply, "In the gold fields, a man or a woman is judged by the sweat of their hands, not the blood in their veins. You truly believe that I believe it enough to risk everything." Jace poked at the fire sparks shooting into the black sky. "And if you're wrong, if it's no different than here, then I'll know the truth and I'll choose another road." She met his eyes across the flames. "And you, Jace Coulter, what sends a cavalryman to wander alone through deserts until death nearly takes him?" Her words struck too close. He couldn't explain the restless ache, the need that had driven him west after the war, his failure to settle into a life like other men. "I reckon I'm still searching," he said finally. "For what?" The silence stretched so long he thought she'd given up. At last he spoke, surprising even himself. "A place I belong. A reason to quit drifting." Tala studied him, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps we are not so different, you and I." They sat quietly as the fire sank to glowing coals. Coyotes called in the distance, the night folding around them. Jace rolled in his blankets, but sleep came slow. Every shift of her breathing, every rustle from her bedroll, reminded him he wasn't alone. It was more than company. There was a charge in the air between them, perilous and undeniable. When sleep finally took him, his dreams filled with dark eyes, copper skin, and a voice that whispered his name like prayer. Dawn arrived too soon, and not soon enough. They packed quickly, riding before the sun grew harsh. The land softened, the desert giving way to pine and oak along rising hills. By midday, they found a stage road, its wheel ruts and horse droppings oddly reassuring after the wilderness. Tala studied the track. "We can follow this into the next town. Supplies. Maybe fresh horses." Jace nodded, though he caught something guarded in her voice, as if towns and crowds unsettled her as much as the desert had unsettled him. He understood. They rode side by side, the mountain road curling before them. In the clear light, Jace caught himself staring. She looked even more striking than she had by firelight, her profile sharp, her back straight despite the miles. It wasn't just her striking looks that drew him in. There was a quiet fire about Tala, a strength that made her seem unshakable, and it left Jace Coulter both drawn to her and unsettled. She carried herself with purpose, bold enough to risk what others wouldn't. It made Jace feel the weight of his own drifting years spent wandering from one trail to the next without aim. Then Tala's voice cut through his thoughts. "Tell me about the war." The question caught him flat-footed. Most folks, especially women, never wanted to hear of such things. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "What it was like, or what it taught me." He thought on it, then spoke slowly. "It taught me men can be crueler than the devil one moment and show mercy the next. That courage doesn't mean no fear. It means moving ahead in spite of it. And that the reasons we start fighting aren't always the reasons we keep going. You sound as if you doubt the cause. I believed in the Union. I still do. But after 4 years of watching boys die in mud, a man starts to wonder if any cause is worth that kind of price." Tala was quiet, her tone steady when she finally answered. "My people have fought just to stay alive for generations. We know the cost of war better than most." Something in her voice made him study her closer. "You've seen battle. I've seen my village burned to the ground. I've seen children slaughtered just for being Apache. I've seen what happens when one people decide another has no right to live." Her words struck like a blow. Jace felt ashamed knowing he had chosen his war, while she and hers had been fighting simply to survive as their land slipped away piece by piece. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Don't pity me," Tala replied. "I don't speak for sympathy. I speak for truth. We both know the loss of things that can't be replaced." They rode on in silence, the sun climbing higher overhead. Soon the road dipped toward a valley where smoke curled from chimneys, and the hammering of new buildings rang through the air. Harmony Creek Tala read off a weathered sign. Population 400 and climbing. The place sprawled larger than the sign suggested, businesses lining the main drag houses. Spreading down side streets, the whole town rough-edged and growing faster than it could keep up. As they passed along the street, Jace felt the stares. A white man and an Apache woman riding together was enough to stir talk anywhere, but in a frontier town, it could spell trouble. "Maybe we should split up," he said low. "Meet outside later." Tala straightened in the saddle, chin lifted high. "I'm not ashamed to ride beside you, Jace Coulter. Are you ashamed of me?" The words hit him harder than a fist. Was it shame, Or was it his instinct to shield them both from danger? He had no time to sort it out, because a figure stepped into the street ahead. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the weight of authority, a silver badge gleamed on his vest. "Hold up there," the man called, raising a hand. "Need a word with you folks." Jace felt Tala tense, though her face stayed calm. He reined Duchess to a stop, every muscle ready. The lawman walked toward them, his eyes cold and pale, taking in every detail. When his gaze lingered on Tala, something flickered that made Jace's jaw tighten. "Sheriff Virgil Kane," the man said, tipping his hat in a gesture that carried no warmth. "You're new in Harmony Creek?" "Just passing through," Jace answered evenly. Headed west, Kane's eyes narrowed. Plenty of trouble that way. Apache raids, bandits, you name it. His meaning was clear when his glance cut toward Tala. Jace's hand drifted near his Colt, then forced itself back to the saddle horn. "We'll take our chances." Kane's smile never touched his eyes. "I'm sure you will. But tell me, what's a white man doing riding alongside a—" He let his words hang, his gaze dragging over Tala with quiet insult. "A woman of her kind." Heat rose in Jace's chest, but Tala spoke first. "We're traveling companions, nothing more. Sheriff, is there a law in this town against that?" Her voice was calm, but edged in steel. Kane caught it, and his smile widened. "No law, miss. Just unusual. Folks might start thinking things." The words hung like gun smoke. Jace realized a crowd was gathering, faces peering from doorways, boots clomping on wooden sidewalks, hungry for a show. Sheriff Jace said carefully, "We're not here to stir trouble. Just supplies and water for our horses." "Oh, I'm sure you're not." Kane drawled his tone, saying the opposite. "But trouble has a way of finding us whether we look for it or not." He stepped in close to Tala's horse, forcing her to look down at him. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about the raid on the Harper place last week, would you, miss? 3 dead, one was a woman and her boy. Apache work from the looks of it." Tala's face didn't flicker, but Jace Coulter caught the way her knuckles whitened against the reins. "I know nothing about any raid." "Of course not," Sheriff Virgil Kane drawled. "Still, folks here get nervous seeing your kind ride into town." That was enough. Jace swung down boots, striking the dirt with a heavy thud. He stepped closer, close enough to see Kane's hand dip toward his revolver. Sheriff Jace said, voice steady, "This woman's been at my side for 3 days. She pulled me out of the desert alive. I'll stand for her. If you've got trouble with her, then you've got trouble with me." The street went quiet. The crowd leaned in, sensing the moment could explode. Kane studied Jace, his soldier's bearing, the Colt polished on his hip, the calm way he stood, even half dead from exhaustion. "That, so," Kane muttered. "And who are you, Mr. Jace Coulter, former 3rd United States Cavalry?" Something shifted in the sheriff's pale eyes. Not respect exactly, but a careful measuring of odds. "Well, now, Mr. Coulter, I'll grant you served the Union, but this here is civilian ground, and I'm the law in Harmony Creek." "I understand, Sheriff, but I also know neither of us has broken a law, so unless you mean to arrest us, I'd just as soon be on our way." The silence stretched like a tight rope. Then Kane's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to Jace. Whatever he saw there gave him pause. "All right, then." He stepped back. "Handle your business, but hear me clear, any trouble, any complaint, I'll lay it at both your feet." "Understood, Crystal," Jace replied. Kane tipped his hat this time, including Tala. "Ma'am, Mr. Coulter, enjoy your stay in Harmony Creek." With that, he turned his boots, striking the boardwalk as he left. The crowd began to scatter, though whispers and glances lingered. Jace climbed back into Duchess's saddle, knowing word of their arrival would spread like wildfire before sundown. "Thank you," Tala said softly, as they headed toward the general store. "For what Jace asked. For standing with me. Would have been easier to distance yourself." Her gratitude tugged at his chest. "We're traveling together. That means something, doesn't it?" She met his eyes, her usual guarded mask slipping for a heartbeat. "It means something." She agreed. They tied off outside Hendrick's general merchandise and stepped inside the cramped shop. The wiry clerk behind the counter glanced up, nervousness plain in his eyes. "Help you folks?" he asked, his voice pitched higher than usual. "Supplies," Jace said, pulling a worn list. "Salt, pork, hardtack, coffee cartridges. Whatever you've got." Hendricks gathered their order, though his eyes kept darting toward Tala as she studied jars of preserves. The man's unease might have been laughable if the air weren't so thick with danger. That everything Hendricks asked when the goods were stacked on the counter. Jace checked them over, then nodded. "How much?" $22. It was robbery, but Jace paid without a word. Quarreling would only bring more eyes their way. Outside, as they packed their saddlebags, Tala murmured, "We shouldn't stay here." Jace glanced at the faces peering from doorways and windows, the suspicion written plain as day. "Agreed. We can push another 10 miles before dark." They mounted and rode down Main Street, every stair burning into their backs. At the edge of town, hoofbeats thundered from behind. Jace turned in the saddle. 4 riders were bearing down, hard spurs flashing. No badges, just grim faces. "Ride," he barked. Tala needed no urging. They spurred their mounts, the chase exploding behind them. The posse's horses were fresher, closing fast. There, Tala pointed at a rocky trail that split off the main road. "We can lose them in the hills." They veered off just as gunfire cracked. Bullets hissed past hooves pounding against stone. The trail twisted between boulders and along narrow ledges that dropped into deep ravines. It was no place to run, but they had no choice. Duchess stumbled on the shale, nearly unseating Jace. She was still weak from the desert and fading fast. Up there, Tala shouted, pointing to a cluster of towering rocks forming a natural fortress. "We make our stand." They reached the shelter just as their mounts faltered, hearts pounding with the chase at their backs. Jace Coulter pulled his rifle from its scabbard and found a perch where he could cover the narrow trail below. Beside him, Tala drew out a Winchester from her gear, handling it with the sure confidence of someone who had learned to shoot not for sport, but to survive. The 4 riders appeared around a bend, driving their mounts hard, despite the treacherous footing. Jace recognized 2 from the crowd in Harmony Creek, local men who had decided the sheriff wasn't quick enough to act. "That's far enough," Jace called down. "Turn back and ride to town." The lead rider, a bearded fellow in a cracked leather vest, barked out a harsh laugh. "Not likely, soldier boy. You and your squaw have stirred up plenty already." The insult landed like a lash across Tala's face. Jace saw her finger tighten on the trigger, and he knew the moment was seconds from turning bloody. "Last warning," he shouted. "Go to hell!" the man yelled back, lifting his rifle. Jace fired first, the bullet slamming into the man's shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. The shot cracked through the canyon like thunder. The other 3 scattered, diving for cover behind brush and stone. Tala's Winchester roared twice in quick reply, and one of the men howled as her bullet found him. The canyon erupted into a furious exchange gunfire, echoing back and forth. Bullets screamed past, sparking off rock, tearing the air. But these weren't seasoned gunfighters, they were townsmen, high on hate and whiskey. Soon their fire grew ragged, their nerve unraveling under the steady aim of practiced shooters. After 10 minutes of chaos, they finally turned tail, dragging their wounded down the trail. Jace held still until the last hoofbeats faded. His hands trembled with adrenaline, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You hurt?" he asked. Tala shook her head, though he could see the fight had shaken her spirit. The sheer cruelty of those men, their eagerness to kill her simply for who she was, hung heavy between them. "We can't go back," she whispered. "No," Jace answered. "We can't." They were outlaws now, whether they had wanted it or not. Harmony Creek was behind them, but its poison would linger. "Where do we go?" he asked. Tala's gaze stretched west over the canyon. When she spoke, her voice was steady but sorrowful. "West. Always west. It's the only road left to us." They gathered their horses and pressed on, climbing into the mountains as the sun slid toward the horizon. Behind them, the town and its malice faded like a bad dream, yet Jace knew the memory of this day would remain. Civilization's mask was thin, and they had just seen how quickly it could fall away. That night in a grove of pines, they made camp. Jace watched Tala as she worked with quiet resolve, collecting wood and preparing their meager supper. He could see the weight on her shoulders, though she carried it without complaint. "It isn't your fault," he said, as they sat by the fire. "Isn't it?" She stirred the flames with a stick, sparks twisting into the dark. "If you had been alone, this wouldn't have happened. If I'd been alone, I'd be buzzard feed by now. Perhaps, but you wouldn't be a wanted man." The truth of it hung heavy. By standing with her, Jace had crossed a line he couldn't walk back. "Do you regret it?" she asked, quiet but sharp. The question forced him inward. Regret would be the wise answer, the safe answer. But as he looked at her across the firelight, her strength edged with vulnerability. Regret was the last thing he felt. "No," he said firmly. "I don't." Something softened in her face, the hard lines easing in the glow of the flames. For the first time, the wall she carried seemed to crack. Why she whispered? How could he explain? Why risk everything for a woman he'd only known 3 days? He swallowed hard. Because it was the right thing to do. And because... He hesitated, the truth heavy in his chest. "Because I'm tired of being alone." The words filled the night like a confession more intimate than touch. Tala's eyes widened slightly, reflecting his own longing. Slowly she moved around the fire, not touching, but close enough he could feel her warmth. "I know that loneliness," she said softly. "I've carried it like a stone inside me for so long, I can't remember life without it." They sat in silence, the fire burning low, the night alive with owls and coyotes. Then Tala's voice, barely above a whisper. "Among my people, when a man and woman share the trail, the dangers, the saving of each other's lives, it forges bonds deeper than blood." Jace's breath caught the weight of her words, settling heavy in his chest. Jace Coulter turned toward her, finding his own hunger mirrored in Tala's dark eyes. She reached out, fingertips brushing lightly against his cheek. The touch burned through him like lightning, sparking every nerve in his body. "I know what's in your mind," she said softly. "That I am Chirikawa, that you are white, and the world will never bless what stirs between us." "The world's already passed judgment," Jace answered, his voice raw. "Then maybe it's time we stopped living by the world's judgment." She leaned closer, and he caught the wild, clean scent of her hair like mountain air after rain. His heart hammered in his chest as her lips parted slightly, inviting. Every part of him begged to close the space, yet old walls of restraint chained him still. He had never known a woman the way she was offering herself now, never allowed himself that kind of surrender. His words faltered. Understanding flickered in her gaze, replaced by tenderness. "You never have." He shook his head, shame burning in his face, 30 years old, carrying innocence like a brand he never dared admit. But Tala's look held no mockery, no judgment, only compassion. "There is no shame in it," she whispered. "Some things are worth the waiting." She settled against him, resting her head on his shoulder. That simple act undid him more than passion ever could. His body trembled from the sheer weight of it. "We have time," she murmured. "All the time we need." They stayed wrapped in each other as the fire dwindled to coals, two lost souls holding tight to something fragile, yet priceless. Dawn spilled over the peaks like a promise gilding the sky with red and gold fire. Jace woke to find Tala coaxing life back into the fire, her movements precise and steady. She had been awake when he finally drifted off, her breath warm against his chest, her body curled trustingly into his arms. The memory of that closeness filled him with warmth deeper than the flames. "Sleep well?" she asked, not looking up. "Better than I have in years," he said, truth plain in his voice. Despite the hard ground, despite the thin blanket, and the knowledge that they were now hunted, he had slept like a man, finally at peace. Tala looked up, and something in her expression quickened his pulse. The walls around her heart were still there, but they seemed more like gates now, barriers that could open. "We need to move," she said, rising in one fluid motion. "Those men will return, likely with a posse this time." Jace nodded. Romance was a dangerous luxury. The territory itself would be chasing them before noon. They packed with practiced efficiency, their teamwork born of necessity and trust. As he tightened Duchess's girth, Jace found his eyes lingering on Tala, in the morning light, the strong line of her jaw, the determined set of her mouth. She caught him staring. "Something wrong?" "No," he said quickly. "Everything's fine." The trail climbed higher into the mountains, twisting through pine and aspen toward peaks still capped in snow despite the summer heat. Rugged country that tested horse and rider alike, but it gave them the best chance of shaking pursuit. As they rode, Tala shared stories of these mountains' tales passed down by Yuma, her grandmother. Hidden valleys where deer drank, caves that gave shelter in storms, paths carved by generations of her people. Jace realized her way of seeing the land was different. Where he saw obstacles, she saw provision. Where he saw wilderness, she saw home. "Your grandmother must have been remarkable," he said as they paused by a stream. "She was. She taught me that survival means moving with the land, not against it, like water finds its course." Tala's eyes grew distant. "And that the greatest strength can be knowing when to yield. Is that what you're doing now, yielding, perhaps? Or perhaps I'm finally allowing myself to want more than survival?" The words hung heavy with meaning. Jace's pulse raced, but before he could answer, the sharp echo of gunfire rolled up the canyon. They reacted instantly, mounting and pushing higher to a rocky ledge with a view of the trail below. Through the thin mountain air, they saw dust rising, riders closing from the direction of Harmony Creek. Posse, Jace said grimly. "A dozen at least." Tala studied the dust cloud, her face calm, but calculating. "They'll reach the fork within 2 hours. We need to clear that ridge first." They pressed hard, the switchbacks, brutal on tired horses. Duchess, still weak from the desert, began to falter, breath labored foam flecking her mouth. "She's not going to last," Jace muttered, stroking her neck. "There's a place," Tala said, pointing toward a cleft between tall stone pillars. "An old hunting camp of my people. We can rest them there and decide our next move." The camp was little more than a ring of weathered rock hidden off the trail, but it offered cover and a pause in the flight. A small spring bubbled through the rocks enough to water the horses and let them crop a patch of grass. But both Jace Coulter and Tala knew this was only a pause, not salvation. The posse wouldn't quit. and Sheriff Virgil Kane struck Jace as the kind of man who'd take their escape as a personal insult. "We could split," Jace said as they worked at the creek. "You know these hills better than I ever could. Alone, you could vanish clean." Tala's answer came sharp. "No. That makes sense only if I'm the prize they're after. You could—" I said no. She turned on him, her eyes blazing. "Do you think so little of me that I'd leave you the moment danger shows its teeth?" "That's not it." "Then what is it, Jace Coulter?" The challenge in her tone made him face the truth. Was it her safety he wanted? Or was he slipping back into that old habit of pushing people away before they could walk out on him? "I don't want you hurt because of me," he said finally. "And I don't want you dragged down because you chose to defend me," she shot back. She stepped closer, close enough for him to see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "We're bound together now, whether by fate, stubbornness, or something else. I won't break that bond just because the road ahead is steep." Her conviction filled a hollow in him he'd carried for years. Together, then. Together. They waited out the worst heat of the day, keeping watch while the horses grazed. But as the sun dipped, voices echoed faintly up the canyon walls. The posse had reached the hunting trails, spreading wide. From his vantage, Jace counted 15 armed men. "They'll catch our tracks soon enough," Tala whispered. "We need to move before they look here." They hurried to saddle up, but Duchess stumbled badly, her legs trembling, breath rasping shallow. "She can't go on," Jace said, heart sinking. Tala's hands moved gently over the mare. When she looked up, her face was grave. "She needs weeks of rest, days at the least. Then we walk. In these mountains, with winter pressing close, and men behind us, we'd be dead inside a week." They stood in the fading light, trapped between choices that offered no way forward. Tala's voice came quiet, but certain. "There may be another path, but you won't like it. Tell me." "My mother's brother," she said slowly. "Neshoba's son, Joseph. He has a spread 30 miles north below the snow line." Jace caught the hesitation in her voice. "And he cast me out when I left the reservation. Said I shamed our family trying to live in the white man's world." Her voice stayed level, but pain edged every word. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. And you think he'll help us now? He might help his brother's daughter. Especially if the choice is between sheltering me or seeing me killed." It was a desperate gamble, but the only one they had left. As the searchers' voices drifted closer, the decision was made. Duchess had to be left behind. The thought tore at Jace. She'd carried him through hell. But he stripped off saddle and bridle, whispering a promise as he stroked her neck, giving her a chance to survive free. They doubled up on Tala's paint horse, slipping into the mountains as night fell. The trail was treacherous in the dark, but Tala guided true-born to these ridges. They rode through the night, resting only long enough to spare the horse. By dawn, the land had grown harsher, the tree line creeping close. "There," Tala said, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from a valley. "My uncle's ranch." The homestead was modest, a log cabin, a small barn, a few dozen cattle chickens scratching in the yard. Peaceful, almost foreign after days on the run. As they rode up, the cabin door opened. A man of 50 stepped out, gray streaking his braids, his weathered face carved from the same stone as Tala's. At sight of her, his expression darkened. "Tala," he said, his voice a mix of anger and relief. "What trouble have you brought now?" She dismounted, holding herself with dignity despite their plight. "Uncle Joseph, I need your help. Help." His eyes flicked to Jace, taking in his pale skin the soldier's bearing. "This is what you bring to our door, a white cavalryman." "This man saved my life," Tala said firmly. "And I saved his." We are bound by more than chance. Joseph's face hardened further at her words. Bound. You disgrace your mother's memory with talk like that. Jace had heard enough. He swung down, making sure his hands stayed well clear of his Colt. Sir, my name's Jace Coulter, he said evenly. Your niece speaks true. She saved me from death, and I'd lay down my life to protect hers. We're in trouble through no doing of our own, and we need a place to rest and think, Jace Coulter said. Joseph's dark eyes studied him sharp as a hawk's, yet giving nothing away. Trouble? He asked slowly. What kind of trouble brings a white cavalryman and my full-blood niece to my door? Tala laid it out plain, harmony. Creek Sheriff, Virgil Kane, the townsman who'd hunted them into the hills. As she spoke, Joseph's expression shifted anger, cooling into worry, then settling into weary resignation. You spilled white blood, he said when she finished. We defended ourselves, Jace answered firmly. 2, maybe 3 wounded. No one dead. Joseph shook his head. It makes no difference. In their eyes, you are a white soldier who chose an Apache woman over his own kind. For that insult, they'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. The truth of it hung heavy. They all knew what happened to white men seen with Indian women, and what befell Indian women caught with white men. What do you want from me? Joseph asked at last. Somewhere to hide. Somewhere they won't find us, Tala said quietly. For a long moment Joseph was silent, torn by loyalties old and new. Then he sighed and motioned toward the cabin. Come in. You both look like death. We'll eat, then we'll speak of what can be done. Inside the cabin was plain but warm, furnished with hand-hewn chairs and decorated with Chiricahua keepsakes. Joseph's wife, Nuria, a plump woman with kind eyes, fussed over them, at once setting about a meal. Over food, the first hot meal they'd had in days, Joseph pressed them hard about their plans. His gaze lingered longest on Jace. You say you are bound, Joseph said finally. What does that mean to you, white man? Jace felt 3 pairs of eyes upon him. It was a test, and his answer would decide everything. It means, he said carefully, that I'd rather die than see her harmed, that I've chosen her knowing full well the cost, that I want a life with her if she'll have me wherever that may be. Something in his tone softened Joseph's hard stare. And you, niece? What does it mean to you? Tala met his eyes without flinching. It means I've found someone worth fighting for. Someone who sees me as a woman before anything else, not Apache, not half-blood, not a label. Joseph nodded slowly, firelight flickering in his face. And if I help you, then what? Where will you run California? Tala answered, without hesitation. The gold fields, a place to vanish to start new with different names, a different life. Joseph grunted. Dangerous land, lawless. More lawless than here, Jace asked. At least there we'll be judged for our actions, not our blood. Joseph stared into the hearth for a long time, flames reflecting in his eyes. When he spoke, it was with heavy resignation. There is a way, but it will cost you everything. Your past, your names, all that you were before today. He looked at them both in turn. I can see you to California, but you'll arrive as different people. New names, new stories. And once you take that step, there is no turning back. The weight of his words pressed down on them salvation or damnation, depending on how one looked at it. How Jace asked. Joseph's mouth curved in a grim smile. I have connections. Debts owed. There's a wagon train out of Denver in 2 weeks bound for Sacramento. If you reach it, I can see your names written down as man and wife. New papers, new lives. And how do we get to Denver without being caught? Jace pressed. That is the hard part. The posse will watch the roads and towns. But there are other ways, old trading trails most whites don't know. He gestured toward a rough map pinned to the wall. It cuts through the high country. Harsh country, especially with winter closing in, but passable if you know the land. Tala leaned forward, studying it. I know some of this. My grandmother Yuma traveled parts of it. The northern stretch I will guide you, Joseph said, as far as the Colorado line. After that you'll be alone. The offer left them both stunned. Joseph was risking everything, though his face gave little away. Uncle Tala whispered, tears bright in her eyes. Why? Because you are blood, he answered gruffly. Then his voice softened, reluctant. And because maybe there is wisdom in choosing love over fear, even when the world curses it. They stayed 2 days at the ranch, resting, preparing. Joseph gave them warm clothing, stronger horses' supplies for the trail. More than that, he gave them something they hadn't dared hope for: acceptance. By the time they left, he spoke to Jace not as an enemy, but almost as kin. On their last night, as they sat by the hearth, Joseph brought out a small leather pouch. He pressed it into Tala's hands. This belonged to your grandmother, Yuma. She'd want you to have it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace inlaid with turquoise. Tala lifted it carefully, tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought it was lost. When soldiers burned our winter camp, she whispered. I saved what I could. Joseph said quietly. He lifted the silver necklace from its pouch and fastened it around Tala's neck with steady, almost reverent hands. Jace Coulter watched as the moment settled over them. This was no mere ornament. It was a thread to her people, a blessing from ancestors who had walked these mountains long before any white man set foot here. Thank you, Tala whispered. The words carried far more than gratitude. That night, wrapped in blankets near the fading fire, Tala turned toward Jace with a look he'd never seen on her face before, strength laced with vulnerability, fear tempered by trust. Tomorrow, we begin a new life, she said softly. But tonight, I want to give you something that belongs only to us. Her hand brushed his cheek, feather light, filled with tenderness. When she leaned in, Jace didn't hold back this time. Her lips were warm, tasting of coffee and wild honey. The kiss began gentle searching, then grew deeper, breaking loose years of loneliness and silence. When they finally parted, both were breathless, hearts pounding with the rawness of what had passed between them. Are you sure? Jace asked, his voice rough. I have never been surer of anything in my life. What followed was more than desire. It was a communion, a vow written in flesh and spirit. Beneath a sky burning with stars that had witnessed such moments since time immemorial, they gave themselves fully to each other. Afterward, as they lay close under the blankets, Tala traced slow patterns across his chest. Do you know the name I will take when we start anew? He turned his head, searching her eyes. Tell me. Elena, she said softly. Elena Coulter, if you'll have me as your wife. Hearing his name bound with hers sent warmth rushing through him. Elena, he repeated, savoring the sound. It suits you. And you? She asked. What will you call yourself? I haven't thought on it. Something plain, a name that won't draw eyes. Thomas, she suggested. Thomas Coulter. It has a strong ring to it. He smiled faintly. Thomas and Elena Coulter, husband and wife heading west to start over. Do you think we can make it work? Jace pulled her against him, breathing in the wild scent of her hair. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know this: we'll face it together. Together, she echoed. And in that single word lay every promise, every hope two hearts could hold. As dawn spilled over the mountains in strokes of rose and gold, they rose to break camp. Ahead lay a trail long and treacherous, filled with dangers they could not yet imagine. But for the first time, neither of them rode alone. And in the end, that changed everything. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.